G'day, everyone. Well, oh, sound like I'm from Australia. Oof. Hello. Welcome to today's weekend live stream. Finally cut my hair, so none of the shagginess. Um, Enjoyed my 2 weeks off. Actually, well, it wasn't an enjoyable 2 weeks because I was doing finals for my classes and some other things. Started volunteering with my local health department a lot, and we're doing 2 or 3 deployments every week to do testing for the ongoing pandemic. So that's been a little bit busy and a little bit stressful. So I appreciate being allowed to take 2 weeks off without too much grief. Um, and so we're back. We're back on our Saturday stream schedule. Uh, it probably won't be as consistent as every week going forward. Again, because I'm continuing with my volunteering, and I'm getting close to the end of my degree. So um, there's going to be a few weeks when I probably won't be able to stream, or I'll stream on an off day. What else? Yeah, other than that, we'll be tying to some flies, doing some chatting, and hanging out together. Um, so yeah, let's jump right in. So today we're going to tie a Claret J. This is from Pryce Tannat, and I've been tying a lot of flies from Pryce Tannat, and I realized um, I realized this a couple weeks ago actually. But I think the reason why I'm tying a lot of flies from Pryce Tannat is because the material lists in Pryce Tannat are a little bit more accessible. Um, and tying flies or streaming every week, I've been burning through a lot of my materials a lot faster than I normally do. Because I don't tie. I mean, I tie regularly, but I don't tie every single week even before I was streaming. And so uh, by streaming, a little bit of accountability. I've been tying a lot more than usual. I realized I was burning through my materials a lot faster than usual because of it. So, but I've been tying a lot from Pryce Tannat because Pryce Tannat's materials lists tend to be a little bit more accessible. But anyway, we're gonna tie the Claret J. This is I think I've tied. Ooh, I've got a box here. I've tied a whole bunch of Pryce Tannat's Irish flies recently. Um, so we have the fiery brown, which is a very pretty one. The thumbnail photo for today's stream is the Fenian. The Fenian, which to nobody's surprise is an Irish salmon fly. One's kind of a little bit raggly in the wing, but have a half gray, half brown, which is a surprisingly pretty fly. I wasn't sure how it would turn out with the particular materials that I had, but this kind of golden olive and brown throat with the grizzly body hackle is actually quite a nice look. And then finally, I've got the golden olive, also from Pryce Tannat. So this is kind of the I've been tying a lot of these, and I've been thoroughly enjoying them. But as you can see, I've already started this fly, and actually, I wasn't intending to stream this fly on on YouTube, just because I needed to tie some flies that weren't on stream, and I was also doing some experimenting with different. So I'm just putting these flies back in my box. I'm using to store, obviously, one of my magnetic display boxes. Super useful. Made out of a recycled cigar box. These Oliva Series V Melanio boxes are like the perfect size for a decent number of salmon flies. The other boxes that I really, really like are the AJ Upman, or sorry, not AJ, the H Upman by AJ Fernandez boxes. Because those are really nice and robust. Um, but anyway, magnetic display boxes. I occasionally have them for sale at shows, so if you'd like one, you can buy them. Otherwise, they're really easy to make. They're just magnets covered in felt under glued into the cigar box. But anyway, I started this fly because I was going to tie it just off stream. I was experimenting with some different stylistic choices, but I think I've nailed actually with those other flies I just showed you. I've actually nailed down the style that I like, and it surprisingly, well to me, involves a slightly chunkier wing. So those wings there have between 24 and or 20, I think 22 and 26 fibers, depending on which wing, which is actually fairly chunky for that. Those are just one-aught hooks. So a little bit thicker of a wing, uh, and I kind of like that effect with this style of fly. Um, I guess normally, if or previously when I was tying a one-aught hook, I probably would have not done more than maybe 18 fibers in a wing. But I found that those extra fibers just kind of make it a little bit more substantial. And for these Irish flies, they're not terribly complex. They don't have crests. They don't have crazy complicated sides. So they do kind of benefit from just that little extra, oomph, so to speak. So the tail veilings. So it's a round silver tip, orange silk tag, crest, tail, and veiled by, excuse me, golden pheasant and cock of the rock. I'm using a red weaver substitute for cock of the rock. Let's see. Trying to give you a good background here, not too busy. um, I'm using Red Weaver as a substitute. Some of the longer back feathers off of Red Weaver are pretty spot on structure wise. They're maybe a little bit, they're a touch red, um, a touch on the red side to be a true cock of the rock substitute, but that's all right. So I'm mostly just going to tie this fly. It's pretty straightforward. I've done this fly before. I've done some other versions of it. This version again does not appear in Malone, at least not entirely as described in Pryce Tannat. Um, which I guess by now I shouldn't be surprised that that happens, but I'm still surprised every now and then. No, actually, you know what? Before I do that, before I start binding everything down, I'm gonna tie in my rib. Now this has a completely dubbed body, and doesn't have like many dubbed bodies start with like 2 or 4 turns of silk. This one is a completely dubbed body, and so I'm just going to not worry about my underbody or keeping my underbody smooth at all. I'm just going to tie everything in and bind everything down because it's more important that everything is secure. And I'm not worrying about thread bulk underneath the dubbed sections. So, and it doesn't need to be smooth. trim up some of the stuff that is going to be a little bit too much bulk. And then again, I like to, if I'm dubbing without using a dubbing loop, which I do just kind of out of expediency, I like to lay down a layer of waxed thread under the body, so that when I go to dub the body, it ends up you having, you know, it can stick to the wax, both on the thread that you dub onto, and then also the wax on the underneath the body or on the underbody. So. Also, having a layer of wax thread just helps kind of stick down any of the fuzzies that might arise from, you know, tying off the tail or the veilings. Uh, there is a body hackle, and we are going to tie it in at the point of the second turn of the rib, which is approximately, it's a little bit short of a quarter of the way down, is the way I like to think about it. Now, this, of course, being a claret J, the significant portion of the body is claret. Claret seal's fur. Officially, the recipe calls for a deep claret. I'm just going to use a regular, like, Irish claret. Okay, so I'm going to tie my hackle in here. And as usual, I'm looking for a hackle with a good amount of taper. I'm also looking for a fairly narrow hackle because this does have a J throat, and I definitely prefer it when my throat is at least as long as the body hackle, or to put it the other way, the body hackle is at least as short, or um, well, at least as short. The fibers aren't any longer than the throat, I should say. And problem is this particular bag of hackles is pretty well picked over. I think I say that every week whenever I pull out the claret hackles, but it's true. These I've had this particular bag of hackles for quite a while now, and I have picked through them pretty thoroughly. How many of those? This one. Yeah, okay. This one will do. Okay. So this one might be a little bit on the short side. I might be pushing it to get enough wraps, but tie it at the very, very tippy top. All right. So I always start my hackle on the back side because whenever you tie in a hackle, and you start wrapping the hackle, there's always a little bit of a gap. I mean, no matter how hard you try, there's always a little bit of a gap before the fibers actually start to poke out from the hackle stem. as you wrap. For some reason, there's always like this little bare spot, and I definitely like to have my hackle start underneath or right at that second turn of rib. So I always tie my hackle in a little bit early. So I always tie it on the back side of the hook. And if I were tying in a really thick hackle, maybe like heron, or like a maybe like a waterfowl hackle, so like a bronze mallard hackle, um, tying it in on the backside also reduces the bulk that you just add to the hook. So let's continue dubbing. I always dub in short sections on thread. So I'll probably do this dub in 4 or 5 sections. It's just easier to control. It's also easier to control the taper and the thickness of the body. And again, because I use the wax on the underbody, or a layer of wax thread on the underbody, I don't need to use a dubbing loop to have my dubbing be secure. The other advantage of doing your dubbing in small sections like this is also that you don't waste dubbing, particularly seal dubbing. Because you can control the amount that you're using a little bit more carefully. Okay. And then the last quarter of the body is dark blue, at least in Pryce Tannat's listing. So I have a little bit of royal. This is royal blue. It's actually probably, well, it might be a little bit bright um, for this, but yeah. Okay. I need to run my rib. For the rib is just oval gold tinsel. This is, I think, Lagarton small. I probably could use a thicker bit, but yeah, shows up well. So yeah, it's fine. that gets tied down along the bottom of the hook. And then take the hackle. Let's see. Just gonna fold it gently. So all I'm doing is I'm pulling the hackle out. I'm pulling all of the fibers to one side between my fingers, just until it folds. And if you have good, a nice hackle that is well prepared, this step folding shouldn't be too much of a struggle. I find it's easier to do fold a hackle while it's on the fly. There are ways to fold it, in hand uh, before you tie it in. Um, but the only time I would ever do that is if I were tying in hand without a vise. Um, and even then, I'm probably more likely to use techniques in which you tie in the hackle and then fold it on the fly. Um, there are a few ways to do it. I don't, I don't think any of them are like official, but there are definitely ways to tie or to fold hackles on flies in hand. Um, Blacksmith thread, just so I don't pull out the hackle in the future. There you go. But yeah, if you're tying on a vise, fold your hackle on the fly because it just gives you a good kind of anchor point, something to the key to folding a hackle and making it easy is to pull the hackle taut, and so you need to figure out a way. So one way to do it, if you're trying to fold a hackle off the fly, is you can grip the tip of the hackle between these fingers here, and you're holding the hackle flat. So here's the bottom side, here's the top side, and you can just push the fibers down like this, and you can fold the hackle off the fly. Um, that's one way to do it. I don't think it works quite as well. It's certainly not as easy. The other way, uh, that's the primary way off the fly. The other way to tie to that I've seen people use when folding hackles, like on hand tied flies, is they'll tie the tip in like you would, like you were going to tie in the hackle, but then you basically hold down the fly with your thumb. You hold the hackle, you stretch the hackle out like this, and then you take like your scissors and you just run them up one side, and then fold the hackle. Um, that's pretty. That takes more coordination than I got. So. So if I'm tying on a vise, yeah, there's no reason not to fold your hackle or to. There's no reason to wait or not wait until your fly is or until your hackle's tied in to fold your hackle. You know what I'm saying. Okay, so like I said, the throat is J. Um, like I said, this is burning through my materials a little bit quicker than normal. This is the last of my J that is rated to tie 3/0. Um, so I think I've mentioned this in prior streams, but these are 1/0 Gaelic Supreme. I think Francis hooks, or maybe Pryce hooks, one of those. But they are the same size as the 3/0 Harrison Bartley hooks that they have. So I'm not entirely certain like what size they are really supposed to be, but or I do find that they require 3/0 size J hackles. Now, in order to maximize my efficiency with the J hackles, um, so to prep my J hackle, sorry, I stripped the unbarred side, and you'll notice that this J hackle is actually a left hand. So from my perspective, it's on the barring's on my left, and that means when I wrap it, I have to wrap it towards me, and that's not a problem. I think doing that maxes my efficiency because I can use these J feathers from both the right side and the left side. Uh, it's when you're talking about J hackles or hackles that are slightly a little bit more or a little bit more rare and are one sided, like J. Uh, you're just gonna have to adapt to tying in the hackle and wrapping it in a different direction uh, than say your average chicken hackle. Because like your chicken neck hackle, it doesn't matter what side of the bird it was grown on, but when the barring occurs, when the pattern or the barring of interest occurs on just one side, that requires a little bit of adaptation. So I'm going to be wrapping this hackle in the direction that opposite of what I would normally wrap a hackle. Um, but that doesn't really change, at least for me, it doesn't really change either the tie-in point or the tie-off point. You only get about 2 turns of J hackle anyway, because they are kind of short. The other thing about J hackles is the stem, the rachis, is extremely thick compared to um, chicken hackle. So and in some ways, I think tying off a hackle that is counterwound can be easier, just because, especially if you're trying to tie off in a particular direction. Um, it's a little hard to explain, but wrapping the hackle in one direction and your thread in the other um, can sometimes be easier. Just because then you're forcing the hackle into, or it's not quite the right description, but you're pushing the hackle, you're pushing the thread through the hackle in a manner that allows it to be tied down easier. It's so hard to explain some of these things because I do a lot of these things by feel. But anyway, so now I just want to build up a little bit of extra bulk because again, these J hackles have very thick stems, and so when I go to tie on the wing and the underwing, I want to have kind of a smooth ramp up and over that J hackle stem. And what I am going to do is because I'm going to add a black ostrich herl head to this fly, I'm going to tie off the white thread and start in on black thread. So set aside my white thread. And I could be using, black ultra thread like the 70 denier. I happen to have some of this, an older spool of this Legarten. I'm still using this black thread because again, I only use black thread on when I'm tying the head in the head area. I use white thread through most of the body. Um, So I still have the spool of black, although I am kind of running to the end of it. This is just Lagarten 74 denier black thread. So I use a lot of Lagarten. Not sponsored, but sure could be. All right. Okay. So starting my black thread, I think I've got a pretty good base for the wing built up now. So I've got a few prepped. The underwing are golden pheasant tippets. I've got a couple prepped ones here, although they are not completely prepped. So I will need to just kind of finish prepping them. Now, the particular style of fly that I'm going for kind of has a low, go faster but beefy under or beefy wing. So we're going to use a few tricks here, um, just a few tricks to get this wing to set perfect. Uh, the first trick is flatten the rachis of each of these tippets, and we're going to introduce a little bit of a kink right before the tie-in point. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's just the tiniest hint of a kink, and that will help set the wing, this underwing, a little bit lower over the body. So I'm gonna flatten the entire tie-in point with just flat nose pliers and just a little bit of a kink. Then I think we'll probably tie these in and take them off a few times because that is, of course, the other thing. Since I know I'm going to need it, I'm going to give the rachis a little bit of a twist. So the wing that or the tippet that's towards me, I'm going to give a little bit of a twist towards me, and then the underwing or the tippet that goes away from me, it's going to receive a little bit of a twist away from me. And again, that's to account for the fact that I'm tying the flattened stems of the underwing onto a round underbody. All right, so that J hackle wasn't quite long enough. It's a little bit shorter than the body hackle now that I'm looking at it. That's okay. We can fudge that. Not perfect. Not perfect. So we're going to tie these in just real quick, see how they're doing, and then adjust if necessary. All right, so as you can see, these wings have kind of kicked up a little bit. So a couple things we can do are we can introduce more curvature into this portion here, which I think is probably my first choice. The second choice is to introduce a little bit more of a kink right at the tie-in point, and that'll kick the racus down so that it's like kinked like this. That is probably my second choice, simply because that does make it kind of appear like the underwing is originating from a different place, like somewhere out here. Just the way the fibers flow. Um, and the other thing I think I need is a little bit more of a thread base built up right here. So all I'm going to do is just introduce a little bit of a downward curvature. And it's going to look messy because of just how these particular tippets are curved in. But I swear once they're on the fly, they'll look a little bit nicer. Yeah. All right. There we go. I like that. Yeah, and just by introducing that little extra curvature in the racus. Now, there is a little bit of a twist here. Um, Part of that is these are slightly uneven. Let's see. What do I need to do here? So the far. So this far feather is a little bit stronger. These aren't quite a perfectly matched pair, and that's probably just bad picking on my part. But the far or the tippet that goes away from me, or furthest away from me, is just a little bit stronger in the stem, and so it's forcing the other one, pushing the other one around a little bit. It's being a bully. So just gotta, and like I've said, a lot of this, you know, a lot of tying classic salmon flies, or particularly, you know, getting the style right is just a lot of futzing with feathers. Just pushing them around. Um, Cursing them out, pushing them around until you get them just the way you want them. And I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good progress. So I'm just going to try and introduce a little bit more curvature, a little bit at a time. See if I can't get them to lay down a little bit more. That's not too bad though. I'm going to take a little bit more off the top, however, because I don't want. My preference would be for the underwing not to stick through the top of the main wing, although it might anyway. So one one trick for that is I've stripped most of the fibers away from one side of the tippet, the side of the tippet that will be the top of the underwing. That is definitely a trick, and that is definitely something we don't talk about. But yeah, that is a trick. So if you want a narrower underwing, uh, you strip away the fibers from what would be the top of the underwing, because this particular set of feathers, if they had the full underwing, would be like that high, and that's too thick for this style of fly. So by peeling away the top fibers, I've eliminated pretty much that entire top half of the tippet. I'm actually going to take a little bit more on here. I'm not going to strip it quite bare. There's still a little bit of tip there, but quite a bit of it. Okay, so next, main wing. Scarlet blue and orange. Let's see, what color blue? Okay. Let's go with this blue. So, like the silver Doctor blue. And I need a scarlet. Scarlet. I don't have scarlet, but I do have red. So this is kind of more of a crimson red, but it'll do. So orange, blue, scarlet swan, florican, speckled bustard, Cory bustard, golden pheasant tail. Okay. So actually, this isn't a terribly long materials list for the wing. Sorry, I've got a second monitor a little bit higher and a little bit behind this, so I'm looking up and over. It's not a terribly complicated wing or a long list. I usually consider wings with more than 5, so like 6 plus elements in them to be, complex wings, and I generally treat those a little bit differently. I don't tend to marry, super complicated patterns in those wings, just because that's a lot of stuff. But since we're doing 5, and I think I'm going to do like 4 fibers of each element, we'll do something a little bit more fancy. Okay, Florican. Let's be creative. Let's be a little bit creative. So again, we're doing 4 fibers of each, and I'll marry one wing, see how I like it, and if I like it, then I'll marry the other wing. Let's see, 4 fibers of red. Now it's that's a question. No, I'll go full 4 fibers of Florican. I try not to use too many fibers of Florican because I don't have very much of it. I do like to try and conserve some of these more expensive and exotic feathers, but yeah, we'll splurge a little bit today. So we'll go full 4 of each. So 4 red. I'm running a little bit short on blue. This particular set of feathers has a little bit of recurve. So the reason why I've used entirely one side and not the other is that this side here has a little bit of recurve. So if you look at the feather like this, it curves, but then it recurves up on the tips, and that makes it a little bit harder to incorporate into a married wing. Although it's not too bad towards the tips. So maybe I'll try a thin slice from the tip here. All right, 4 blues, orange, 4 oranges. Thanks. Let's see. So those are the colors. How do I want to split this up? I think what I'm going to do is okay. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do red, blue, orange with a sliver of speckled bustard in between each, and then uh, two fibers of florican. Repeat that, and then do all four fibers of golden pheasant tail at the top, like usual. Like I've said before, I like to put the golden pheasant all together because it doesn't marry very well to other things, and I feel like incorporating it into fully into the wing can be a little bit um, not so great for the structure of the wing. Also, just from a visual standpoint, I like to have a very kind of chunky bit of a one of like the neutral tones. So one of the brown tones fibers at the top, because that mostly gets covered by the bronze mallard, and you know it, if you have a chunkier version or chunkier bit of that particular fiber at the top, then you'll still see it. You know, past towards the tip of the wing, past the bronze mallard, and I don't really want to cover up the Cory bustard or the florican to the extent possible, simply because those are the more expensive fibers, and so I kind of want to keep those as prominent and as visible as possible. They're also the visually more interesting feathers, in my opinion. Some people disagree, I think, probably. Come back. So this will be a little bit more of a busy wing than normal, but that's okay. So red, red speckled blue, speckled blue. Again, when I go to marry in the single strand or the single fiber of speckled bustard, I'm marrying in the entire strip or the entire chunk of speckled bustard that I have cut, and then I'm pulling apart or pulling off the excess, or the ones that I don't need for that particular segment of the wing. So that's one way to make marrying in single fibers easier. Now I am going to have to do that towards the end. I am going to have to marry in a single fiber of speckled, but hey, I only have to do it once instead of 4 times. Okay. Orange. Orange is a little bit thin, but it's okay. Still turkey. It'll still marry. Okay, so you can think of this as like a sub-assembly for the wing. So that's the first repeat. Nope, nope, not quite the first repeat. Get out the florkin. That's not aligned. Okay, come on. Okay. Okay. All right, so that's the first repeat. This way. First repeat, and we'll just turn around and do that again. Of course, I may end up with this wing all married and be completely unsatisfied with it. I don't think so. I hope not. Now, when I'm lining the tips up for each of these strips, I am kind of building in, if you can see, this angle here on the wingtip. So that angle there, I am setting it as I marry in each of these elements. And it doesn't really matter what that angle is, you just have to make sure that that angle is matched between your right wing and your left wing. Because if that's not matched, then it'll make that the tip of your wing look sloppy, and that's not good. So, so that's everything except the golden pheasant married in. Fuzzy. And as you can see, these butt ends here are a little bit raggedy, so I'm gonna just trim the longer ones. That just, in my opinion, makes it easier to tie in the wing because then you don't have the extra long butts sticking out and getting caught on things and messing up your wing setting. And it's just a little less to trim away once your wing is set. And then whoop, golden pheasant tail. Whoop, golden pheasant tails everywhere. Back. Well, let's see. I don't need the longest fibers. The longest fibers on these particular tails, probably about 2.5 inches. These are beautiful tails. Of course, got these from John McLean at feathersnc.com. Not sponsored still, but I would plug John and his feather service anyway because amazing. Bumps that and messed it up. All right, so let's see, 4 fibers. So this actually ends up being a 20 fiber wing, which is right in the range that I was shooting for this kind of set of flies. And there we go. Okay. I'm just going to bump these feathers. Okay. Now I have to do the other side, which will be just as tedious. I have to say, marrying wings can definitely be a tedious exercise. However, I think it is definitely worth it. It's definitely worth perfecting, or at least having that skill. It's one, it's useful, and two, it can really elevate your flies to kind of the next level, so to speak. I also think though, when you're just beginning tying these flies, it's one of the less important skills. Really, if anything, the skill you have to have, no matter how fancy of a wing you can marry, you have to be able to set that wing. You have to be able to tie that wing onto a fly. And if you can't tie, if you can't set a 20 fiber plus wing onto a fly, then there's not really any point in marrying a super fancy wing. So it's a lot of practice using just big chunks. You can take a turkey tail, like a regular wild turkey or Narragansett turkey tail, the brown mottled turkey tails that you can find really cheaply. You just take those turkey tails and you cut off 22 fibers of a right and a left, and you tie that in, and you practice tying that in, and you tie 2 or 3 wings down the shank of a hook. Now I will say it was a little bit disingenuous to try tying in that thick of a wing without having a body under it. It definitely changes the dynamics when you have, because this is when you tie in a body, your tie-in point at the wing ends up being a lot thicker than just a bare shank. So you do have to have some kind of body or underbody and an underwing to practice with, but there's definitely no reason why you don't need. Well, okay, there's not no reason. You can, if you want to try practicing it on married wings, that's fine. More power to you and all that. But if you don't have a whole lot of these dyed turkey or dyed swan, if you don't have a whole lot of the dyed materials, then it is perfectly acceptable just to take a really thick chunk of mottled turkey, brown turkey, and practice using that. don't think you need to do a complex married wing to practice setting a wing on a salmon fly. And like I said, you don't need to. You absolutely don't need to. You can. A lot of people like to jump right in. I get asked this question like, what fly do I start with, or how do I learn? Start with something easy. There are, um, you know, a lot of people suggest like the Thunder and Lightning. Um, that's a pretty good one. There is a pattern of Thunder and Lightning that has strictly a mottled turkey wing with a bronze mallard roof, and so you can tie the Thunder and Lightning with the tip, the tag, the tail veiling if you choose. You don't have to. Black curl butt, black silk body with a silver oval tinsel rib, and maybe a black or brown body hackle, J throw. That's all stuff that you can tie with commons, with your basic fly tying skills. It's setting a really thick, chunky wing that needs to be practiced, and so I think that's why the Thunder and Lightning is a particularly good one because there are really simple patterns. But the other thing is just tie with what you have. A lot of us started just with making things up with what we had. So, Steven, I'm pretty new to fly tying and have trouble with applying dubbing to the thread. Um, yeah. So if you're tying on a big fly like this, so a salmon fly, I like I mentioned before, I like to lay down a layer of waxed thread on the underbody before dubbing, because then that gives the dubbing something to stick to, both thread and the body. In terms of getting the body to stick, or the dubbing to stick to the thread, the best I can say is use a really tacky dubbing wax. I use a traditional wax called cobbler's wax. Uh, Sorry, that's probably backwards in the camera, but I use cobbler's wax. There are modern formulas. When I was younger, pains me to say it like that. When I was younger, I actually used what they called. Oh, I forget what temperature, but I use like ski wax, like cross country ski wax, like the really tacky stuff, and that works pretty well. But mostly it's when you go to dub something, uh, you just want to pull out small amounts of dubbing at a time. Um, for me, that's the main thing. You want to have a lot of control over that bit of dubbing, and if you pull out like a big wad of it, um, you're going to have a lot less control, and it's going to be a lot harder to get it to stick on the thread all at once. If you have to dub a body in 2 or 3 or 4 steps, that's fine. Um, you don't have to do it all at once. This body, the body that I have here, um, I dubbed in 5 steps, um, particularly because this is a big hook. This is a 3/0 hook, but the principle holds. If you have a body, if you're dubbing a body, do it in multiple steps using small amounts of dubbing. Hope that helps. Um, so, like I said, if you're just getting into salmon flies, The biggest challenge is not so much the techniques. The techniques are the same whether you're tying, you know, a size 10 wet fly or a size 3/0 salmon fly. It's just the size. You're doing a lot more of the same technique. And so just practicing at that larger size, instead of that small kind of duck slip wing that you see on like a Bergman wet, you're tying in something that's, you know, five times as thick, five times as many fibers. You know, yeah, that takes some practice, but you can practice for cheap. You don't have to do the fancy married wings or use the um, expensive exotic bustards or pheasants. You know, you can just practice with some mottled turkey. And you can tie a perfectly attractive fly with a mottled turkey wing. In fact, a lot of salmon flies. What is that? One, two, three. A lot of classic salmon flies have mottled turkey wings. Um, the Thunder and Lightning among them. A couple of the versions of Fiery Brown. There are a few kind of more obscure classics that have mottled turkey wings. I am not going to remember off the top of my head, but yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, and if you don't want to, if you are having trouble marrying your fibers, don't worry about it. Um, you don't have to do these kind of super complex married wings. We're just doing it because this is a fairly, you know, it's not a very long materials list for this wing. Um, and we have some time. And it's fun. But and if you want to do like a complex wing like this, the key is clean hands and clean materials. Uh, Clean hands because the oils on your hands can mat down the fibers on the so each of these fiber or I guess each of these fibers has little barbs and they act like velcro and they'll interlock. But what can happen is if your hands are greasy or oily, those oils can mat down those barbs and prevent you from um, marrying, fibers to fibers. The other the other consideration is how clean your materials are. Clean materials will marry easier, simply because their barbs won't be pre-matted down. If you've ever seen a bird like preen itself, what it's actually doing is it's separating mechanically. It's separating those and cleaning those barbs so that the feathers can uh, hold their shape better. I did not do a good job of lining these tips up, but some of them are a little bit chewed up. And it's on the back side of the fly anyway. So I'm going to trim up some of these longer butts again. And I cannot forget the golden pheasants. Because I would do that. Oops, sorry. And then we can set these wings and finish up the fly. Put that away. Oof. So that's a chunky wing. All right. Let's see if we can set it. See how many tries it takes us to set this wing. No guarantees. And if it all explodes, I may have to come back to this next week. We're already over an hour. Right, so what I do is I put the wings back to back, and I try to line up the tips as best as possible. And as you can see, they already kind of like want to tent, so they're a little bit tented. And that just helps get the wing over the underwing. So this. Now, because I'm using such a thick wing, a little bit of saliva. Could use water. Saliva is handy. Just gonna try and soften up, particularly that golden pheasant tail, because golden pheasant tail is notoriously kind of it's almost got like a brittle texture, and that can make it really difficult to compress it properly. And then what I'm doing is I give it a soft loop, and then what I'm doing is I'm lifting up the butt ends and the wing just a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm compressing the wing right at the tie-in point, just letting the weight of the bobbin pull the wing down, but also trying to keep the fibers in the wing stacked. So then I'm going to soft loop again, just continuously compressing that tie-in point and pinching really tightly here, because that helps keep everything aligned. There we go. That is a set wing. I'm kind of pleased with that. Don't normally get it on the first try. As any of you who have watched previous streams have seen, 3 or 4 tries seems to be the norm. So, but yeah, chuffed, as my British colleagues would say. Gonna wax my thread as usual. Always using wax. So Stephen, coming back to your comment just a little bit, one of the things about tying these flies, or any fly, is I think we've kind of gotten away from using wax as often as we ought to, or can. You know, I know it's sometimes like a speed thing, like where you're trying to tie as many flies as possible. But man, using tying wax to just hold things in place, keep them from shifting, it's completely invaluable. And again, I'm pinching very tightly here while I trim because I don't want to shift, want the wing to shift as I gently trim away at the butt ends. And I always trim away at the butt ends of the wings in multiple steps and not all at once. Okay, and a few more wraps with waxed thread just to bind down the butts. There we go. Although it is, wing did split a little bit on this side, and it's mostly a failure of marrying and not so much a failure of tying in. But we can just correct that. And this is where I wish I had a rotary vise because I'm going to look awkwardly at this side. Oh, that looks nice. Okay. So that's nice. That's nice. Kind of lost a little bit of cohesion there. Man, I wonder if this Florican just didn't want to marry to the red turkey. I'm having a little trouble on this side. Come on, stay married. Pretend you like each other. Okay. I'm gonna quit futzing with it there. So that's not too bad. That's a pretty good look. Might be a little touch of a tall wing. I'm for this particular hook. Maybe it's a little bit long. I can't. The designer in me is a little bit thrown off by the particular portions, but it definitely. Yeah, okay, that looks good. I'm gonna stop futzing. That's the other thing is that you kind of learn, and it's kind of learned by feel, is when to stop futzing with stuff. Because we all like to get it perfect, and sometimes, you know, eventually you'll get to a point where it's like it's good enough. So, let's see. Let me put away a few of these feathers just so they're not in my workspace. And then we'll finish this fly up. Now, the only thing that is left on this fly are the sides and the roof. And if you know me, if you watched the stream before, we are going to tie in the sides by reversing our thread. So we'll tie in one side, then the other, or we'll tie in one side, reverse our thread, tie in the other. That's how it goes here, because that works really, really well. So it's a little bit of summer duck, aka barred wood duck, and a little bit of, I think, teal. If it's not teal, then it's probably widgeon or gadwall or something similar. Okay, and we're just gonna marry the summer duck and the teal together, like usual. I'm going to gently shape these because I want them to flow with the wing. Be one with the wing. Two wraps of thread. I'm going to gently trim. And wrap forward just until I can get to the front of the fly. Then I'm going to slip the thread between the blind eye and the gut that I use for the for the eye, and I'm going to reverse my thread wraps and tie on the other side. Now, the reason why I reverse my thread that way is because when tying in soft materials such as any of the ducks, mighty or otherwise, you want to have, if you want to have them be equal or tied in equally, you have to tie them in with equal pressure. And the only way to, as far as I can tell, or at least as far as I've developed, the only way to ensure that you get equal pressure is to wrap them in the same relative direction. So, for example, if I'm tying in something close to me and I'm wrapping away from me up and over, I'm also wrapping away from that material. So then when I tie in the other side, if I want to wrap with the same relative pressure, same relative direction, then I have to reverse my thread to do it. So line them up. Mess that up. Like I always say, don't be afraid to take things off and retie them if you don't get it right. If you're not happy with the way it goes in the first time. Yeah. Now, I don't think. Okay. Bronze mallard over. We're gonna do the tense method. And then there are horns, blue and yellow macaw horns. But we'll do the tense method of bronze mallard roof. Again, bronze mallard roof can be done a number of ways. I could have tied in the bronze mallard as I was tying in the sides. So I've done one side, reversed the thread, done the other. And that works okay. I find it's not quite. It's consistently successful, but it's not consistently good. If that makes sense. I think doing the tent style or the shell style of bronze mallet roof generally looks better. Uh, but it is more difficult to be consistently good. If that makes any sense. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm putting two bronze mallard slips back to back, and then I'm going to reverse their curvature and preen them out so that instead of being tips up, they want to be tips down. So like this, it's a similar way in which you would do like a shell back style spay wing, but you just want to be able to have it follow the curvature of the wing like so. And I actually am going to wrap the thread. I'm going to try this. I've never done it reversed or used my offhand to wrap the thread, but it seems to have not done the trick. Like I said, this is the more challenging method of creating a bronze mallet roof, but it is also the one that is more consistently good looking. Also, this bronze mallard may be a little bit stiff. You actually want really soft bronze mallard. And actually, you want bronze mallard with a lot of gray in it. The reason for having a lot of gray in your bronze mallard is that it's the gray bits, or the gray part, that is actually going to hold the bronze mallard together as you curve it up and over the wing. Because that's a fairly steep curve over that wing. This side keeps slipping. Come here. Okay, and this is a perfect example of why I personally like to reverse my thread whenever I'm tying in duck. It's because I'm tying it this way around the shank, this far slip is wanting to slip down the hook. And if I were tying in these slips individually, I'm missing part of this one. If I were tying these slips in individually, then I would, by reversing my thread, I'm tying them with the pressure going into the fly, equally. Since I'm trying to tie them on together using this technique, it's a little bit different of a challenge. It's definitely challenging, but we'll get it. That felt good. Okay. That looks okay too. One of the split. Okay. Very good. Very nice. Okay. Again, always pretty much in between every component, I'm going to wax my thread and tie everything down with wax thread because you just don't want anything to move. All right, so blue and gold macaw horns. Now, horns are another one of those elements which could be tied in by reversing your thread. I generally haven't found that I needed to, but if you're having trouble tying in macaw horns, do try reversing your thread to tie in the other side, the opposite side. And part of that challenge is because the fibers on a macaw have a certain shape. It's a little bit like ostrich turtle, in which they're T-shaped. So if you think this is the main part of the fiber, and then it's got like a T-shaped fiber, almost like that. And so that can make macaw just a little bit more challenging than other feather fibers to tie in on a wing. You have to be very aware of what direction that T is pointing when you tie it in. And then, as usual, for at least the macaw, I like to tie in the opposite side first because I find it's easier to match the length and angle by tying in the far side first. All these little tips and tricks, I can describe them to you, I can show them to you on video, but a lot of this is just, that's when you bump something because you didn't quite get it right. There you lay down. Yeah, a lot of this is just practice, getting a feel for the materials. A lot of this is just figuring out like what are the materials capable of doing? How far can I push? You know, how far can I push that wing, or how how much can I beat up this mallard to get it to lay perfect? That sort of thing. Okay, just gonna bind down macaw. Then ostrich turtle head, as usual. Got my very nice dyed black ostrich turtle. I could use duster gray, um, but oh, and for those of you who are new to the stream, I store all my feathers in a file keeper, also projects. So these are all my feathers. It's a handy way. It's like a uh, three pocket file holder. I think we got that from like the Container Store or something. It was super cheap, like $7. Um, but it's really useful for holding all of those feathers that don't fit in my case. So I have a tool case which I take with me on the road to shows, but sometimes you get golden pheasant tails or whatever that are too long and don't fit. Forgot I haven't trimmed horns. just going to bind down everything. Now, kind of like the dubbing here, binding down all of the ends here with wax thread really helps keep the ostrich hurl from slipping. And then I'm just going to pull. I'm not folding the ostrich hurl. I mean, it's pretty difficult to fold ostrich hurl. I'm just pulling the fibers to the back side of the. Did I just drop something off the wing? No, I didn't think so. Okay. Falling apart here. Just to make sure that none of the fibers get trapped under the stem pointing forward, because that would result in a messy head. I'm going to get about 4 ramps in. Nope. I'm actually going to undo this. Like I said, don't be afraid to go back and redo things if you aren't happy. I'm not happy with that. So I'm going to wax my thread. Lay down a little bit better waxed thread base. The nice thing about using this particular wax, nuts, pulled out the stem. That happens. At least it wasn't the hackle. The nice thing about using wax thread is that you can use your body heat to remelt the wax a little bit, and that just makes it tacky again, and that just helps the prevent the hurl from slipping down the head while you wind it. So as I wind it, I'm trying to get each wrap as close to the previous wrap as possible. If I see fibers poking forward, I'll just sweep them back a little bit just to make sure they don't get stuck in the wrong direction. And if I want to, I can kind of press the stem of the hurl into the wax thread a little bit just to make it stick. I'm getting to the end of where I can actually wrap because it might get a little bit too tapered. Again, just using my body heat to keep the wax a little bit pliable. I'm just going to tie off the hurl. There we go. So I'm just going to sweep the hurl back a little bit so I can see what I'm doing while I tie off the front of the fly. And then one. Okay, cool. And we will whip finish that and finish there. Thanks for hanging out today. I know this is a longer stream, but heck, these classic Irish salmon flies are both fun to tie. They are fun to tie, and they are simple enough that I feel a little bit bad about breaking up my my tying sessions, into the body and the wing. So it's every now and then it's nice to just tie a complete fly straight through. That's what we did today. So this is the Clara J classic Irish salmon fly, as described by Pryce, Tannat, not Malone. Uh, yeah. Thanks for hanging out. If you want to see more of my work, you can check out my Instagram at justwondering.brad. And if you want to support the stream and help me, continue to bring these flies to the internet, um, you can check out my Etsy shop, uh, Studio1213 on Etsy. Uh, I like the Etsy shop because it means I can give you something. I'm not. It's not like Patreon where I'm asking you for donations. So, uh, and I really appreciate all the support I get. And again, all of that money that I get that comes in from my Etsy shop goes back into purchasing materials, upgrading the technology for the stream. So, for example, I have this wonderful podcasting microphone that I purchased with funds from the Etsy shop. I also upgraded the hard drive on my computer, so I think the stream should be running a little bit better, a little bit faster. Uh, so yeah, I really appreciate you guys hanging out. And like I said, I'm back to probably a fairly regular Saturday schedule, but I probably am gonna. I'll try to stream every weekend, but again, things are busy right now, so I may not be able to get to every weekend. But with that, stay healthy, stay safe. You know, uh, I work in public health. My day job's in public health, and right now things are a little bit scary for us. In my area, we're doing pretty well because we've done a pretty good job at social distancing and wearing masks. But in places like Texas and Arizona and California, they're being hit really hard right now. And yeah, I just hope people are thinking a little bit about what they're doing first. But uh, tough times and busy times for us as well. So anyway, take care, and I'll see you in the next stream.